voluto e che vedrà come protagonista il documentario della regista Katrina McGowan, How to Poison a Planet, che porta alla luce lo scandalo delle PFAS e delle comunità colpite dalle cosiddette sostanze chimiche eterne. Per questo permettetemi innanzitutto di ringraziare i promotori dell'iniziativa, la senatrice Daniela Sbrollina, che oggi non è potuta essere qui con noi, ma che ci tiene tantissimo a portare i suoi saluti, e l'onorevole Davide Faraone per il sostegno incondizionato a questo evento. Ringrazio tutto lo staff che oggi mi ha permesso di realizzarlo, e l'interprete Federica Loddi che ci accompagnerà con le sue traduzioni quest'oggi. Per chi ne avesse bisogno avete la possibilità di ascoltare la traduzione in inglese successivamente con le cuffie. E ringrazio anche il fotografo Ilenia Pepe. Grazie anche alle autorità presenti, quelle che stanno arrivando perché arriveranno man mano. So esserci in sala, adesso non lo vedo, però insomma lo saluto, l'ex sottosegretario alla difesa, il generale Domenico Rossi, l'ambasciatore del Senegal Mameko Ndiaye, spero di aver pronunciato bene il suo nome. Ci sarà anche Greenpeace Italia nella persona di Alessandro Gianni. Ringrazio tutti i produttori, la RAI, la stampa presente che si è davvero interessata all'evento. Però ovviamente vado a ringraziare anche coloro che sono il cuore di questa iniziativa, colui che è vicino a me, che è l'avvocato Terry Douglas, il protagonista di questo documentario. Ringrazierò presto anche i relatori che interverranno da remoto, che sono la regista Katrina McGowan del documentario, l'attivista e attore per i diritti Mark Ruffalo e l'avvocato Rob Bilott, che interverranno sia dall'Australia rispettivamente dagli Stati Uniti, quindi abbiamo tempi un po' stretti, non ci siamo fatti mancare nulla in termini di fuso orari. Permettetemi solo una piccola considerazione prima di lasciare la parola all'onorevole Davide Faraone. Io mi auguro che questo non rimanga solamente un convegno, che sia davvero un'occasione per una reale riflessione e condivisione di un problema che affligge da decenni le nostre comunità. Soprattutto mi auguro che l'Italia riesca prima o poi a ritrovare in se stessa il concetto di comunità, lavorando insieme per un futuro migliore anche grazie attraverso queste iniziative che dovrebbero essere fatte molto di più, sia in ambito istituzionale che associativo che in altre sedi disponibili. Quindi vi ringrazio per l'attenzione e vi lascio anche con questa consapevolezza, dicendovi che questi composti di cui andremo a parlare, le PFAS e le PFOS, sono ormai presenti per il 98% della popolazione mondiale e che sono ormai considerati uno dei disastri ambientali più estesi della storia dell'umanità. E con questo lascio la parola intanto all'onorevole Davide Faraone per i saluti istituzionali. Può parlare sia da qui onorevole che lì, come preferisce.
Grazie, buonasera a tutti, grazie innanzitutto a Serena per la sensibilità che ha mostrato nell'organizzare questo evento e per l'attività da stalker che ha in questi mesi messo in campo fino all'organizzazione della giornata di oggi. E devo dire che questa azione costante di promozione dell'evento mi ha fatto proprio vedere la passione che Serena ha messo nell'organizzare l'iniziativa e naturalmente anche nel tirar fuori un tema di cui in pochissimi in questo paese sanno. E quindi l'importanza di una giornata come questa, di promozione di un fatto che ci riguarda poi da vicino, perché leggevo, poi ho avuto modo di approfondire, e tra l'altro anche non so quanto casualmente, però da quando Serena mi ha parlato di questo tema, mi era capitato, scorrendo i canali in TV, di fermarmi su un film di un avvocato che poi... che sostanzialmente poi ho avuto modo di vedere con gli occhi di chi aveva avuto comunque da parte di Serena un racconto di quello che era accaduto, di quanto avesse influenzato sia la vita dei cittadini che vivevano in quei luoghi con quelle acque inquinate, ma anche la vita di quell'avvocato che sostanzialmente aveva deciso di dedicare a quella causa tutto se stesso, anche a rischio della sua vita, degli affetti e tutto il resto. Per cui io credo che, tra l'altro il tema ci riguarda anche da vicino, perché leggevo che anche in Veneto c'è stato un caso di questo tipo, ed è una questione questa che ci riguarda, quella dell'inquinamento, in questo caso con questa sostanza, ma credo che il tema sia più generale, ci riguarda per l'oggi e ci riguarda per il domani, nel senso come noi riusciamo a costruire politiche che da un lato mettano in campo azioni di ripulitura di quello che abbiamo guastato in questi anni, e al tempo stesso come mettiamo in campo azioni che evitino che noi si rimettano in campo azioni sbagliate che hanno portato a sottovalutare importanti fenomeni come quelli che hanno generato poi l'inquinamento nel pianeta, in questo caso per queste sostanze, ma chissà quanti altri casi sono emersi e quanti ne emergeranno senza un'attenzione da parte delle istituzioni. Noi dobbiamo trovare, e chiudo, una sintesi nel governo di questo pianeta per tenere insieme necessità di sviluppo con la necessità di tutelare il pianeta da un punto di vista ambientale. Troppo spesso, se vedete anche il dibattito che c'è in Europa su tutto il tema del Green Deal, si pone la questione come una dicotomia, uno scontro fra due entità che debbano per forza confliggere, sviluppo o ambiente. E ancora oggi è così, nel senso che noi pensavamo che comunque il patrimonio di questi anni, la cultura ambientale e ambientalista che si è diffusa almeno nel nostro continente fosse ormai una certezza. Invece purtroppo il dibattito ancora oggi in Europa, quello che si sta votando, quello di cui si sta discutendo, è un dibattito molto ideologico che continua a esaltare questa dicotomia, per cui riuscire a trovare un equilibrio secondo me è un tema assolutamente attuale. Oggi è importante che questo evento si sia realizzato, perché promuovere e raccontare anche attraverso fatti realmente accaduti cosa è il guasto ambientale, cosa è l'importanza della salvaguardia del nostro pianeta, penso che sia decisivo, e credo che oggi debba essere, come diceva giustamente Serena, soltanto un inizio, nel senso che credo che questa presentazione di questo film documentario debba essere anche un inizio rispetto ad altre presentazioni che possono essere organizzate nel nostro paese. Naturalmente do la mia disponibilità come oggi a essere a disposizione di Serena per tutto quello che sarà necessario. Grazie ancora e grazie per aver partecipato a questa iniziativa.
Grazie all'onorevole Davide Faraone, davvero. Ci tengo di nuovo anche a salutare e ringraziare la senatrice Sbrollini, che ci teneva molto a essere qui oggi. Lei è attivista, insomma è sul campo, segue da vicino il problema, quelle che sono anche le associazioni afflitte da questo problema. Dovevano essere qui anche l'associazione delle mamme No PFAS dal Veneto, che purtroppo non è potuta essere presente, ma so che ci stanno seguendo in differita da casa, dal nord Italia, perché siamo in diretta anche sui canali del Senato, quindi grazie anche a loro per la partecipazione. Allora, a questo punto io farò uno switch, perché passerò dall'italiano all'inglese e quindi potrete usufruire delle cuffie della traduzione di Federica qualora ne avesse bisogno in italiano, e invito intanto a collegarsi il primo speaker della giornata, che è la regista del documentario Katrina McGowan. Katrina, can you hear me? Are you here?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Hi Katrina, thank you for being here with us. I know.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for your kind support, for your friendship. We worked so close together for all these months in order to realize this amazing event. So I know that here there is very late, so sorry. with this. Okay, Katrina is from Australia. I'm going to introduce you with a few words. Katrina is the director and co-producer of the award-winning documentary How to Poison a Planet with Mark Ruffalo, Gary Douglas, and Rob Bilott. Reveals how the chemical industry hid the dangers of forever chemicals for decades. So, Katrina, can you first tell us how this project came out and what motivated you, Mark Cornwell, the other co-producer, to raise your voices?
Yeah, so well, it's been a number of years now. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago that this journey started, but it started here in Australia. I saw on the news that there was an Aboriginal community in Australia that was positioned just downhill from one of the Australian Defence Force bases. And they had, as a result, received the runoff of firefighting foam over decades into their small village. And so they were taking out a class action here in Australia. And I reached out to the team running that, and they sort of, gave me the contacts to go down to Wreck Bay. So Matt and I went down, and it was quite overwhelming, I think, at the beginning, because there was just every single person that we met in that community had some sort of illness, and it wasn't just elderly people, it was young people, multiple illnesses, and this had been going on for such a long time in the community, and they had just not understood why it was happening to them until it came out that they'd had this contamination. So we just felt like this was something that really needed to be told, and at that point I'd never heard of PFAS chemicals. I didn't know what they were, so it was really new to me. And I don't think there are a lot of people in Australia that knew a lot about them, but we connected up with this really incredible journalist who you'll see in the film, Carrie Fellner, and decided to sort of take on this story together. And so it started in Wreck Bay, and then it sort of ultimately became a film where we were connected up with Rob Bilott, Gary Douglas, and Mark Ruffalo, and it sort of snowballed into becoming a film that told the global story of these PFAS chemicals and what these companies had known for decades.
Thank you. There was a scene or an interview that changed the way you felt about the PFAS personally. Did that change the film in any way? Some experience or a memory? I think about, for example, the bittersweet story of Amara Strandy with A Bad Destiny.
Absolutely. I think in the early days of the research for the film, it was actually sitting down with an expert here in Australia. Her name is Marion Lloyd-Smith, and we were doing a research trip to speak to her. And it was the first time I'd sat down with somebody who was speaking about the global science of these chemicals and the health effects that were coming out about these chemicals, immune system, disrupting the immune system, cancers, all kinds of illnesses. I think the thing that impacted me the most at that early stage was the fact that these chemicals can transfer from mother through into unborn child. And I was a new mum at the time. I'd just had a baby, and she was really small at that point. And so I think that really impacted me, because I just couldn't believe that, these chemicals that had been manufactured on the other side of the world had infiltrated my blood and also that of my daughter before she was born. So I think I had a moment, and if anyone's seen Dark Waters, there's a scene in the film where Mark, who's playing Rob, goes home and throws out all of his pots and pans and rips up the carpet. And I think that was sort of my moment too. I got home and I was throwing everything out and looking around the home saying, these chemicals are in everything. And I also was just so shocked. How did I not know about this? And how do so many people still not know about this? So that was a real turning point for me. It was sort of like my eyes were wide open after that. And I felt really strongly that this film needed to be told. But another huge turning point for the film was obviously connecting up with Rob and ultimately get with Gary Douglas then after that, and Gary granting us this incredible, having this great relationship with Gary and being able to tell the story of the court case that they were taking on over in the US, and when he was able to share the story of what these companies knew over decades. And so again, the film went from being a film about an Australian community to this global story. And along the way, it was sort of almost like a painting. Every single person we spoke to was a new color in this picture and contributed something really important. Every person we spoke to in Wreck Bay, obviously Michael Strandy, and the story of his daughter Amara is just heartbreaking. And really every single person involved in this project brought something to make it become the film that it became.
Yeah, but this way, How to Poison a Planet has begun screening at high schools and university in Australia, United States, and hopefully in Italy soon, inspiring students and encouraging action of PFAS chemicals. What are your hopes for the future?
Yeah, we've had incredible screenings around the world so far, which has been really encouraging. There's been high schools in Australia that have watched the film, and students here have gone on to look at developing an app that you can sort of scan products to see if they have PFAS in them. And so there's been a lot of students that have been inspired by the film, which is so great to see. We've had universities in the US screen the film and more to come in the new year. And it's really encouraging. We want to keep seeing screenings all over the world. We'd like to see it, broadcast and with broadcasters around the world as well. But these educational screenings, the university screenings, I think are so important. And also any NGO screenings that we've had have been incredible. We're just getting such a great response from the film. I think it encourages people to ask more questions. It definitely encourages people to take action, which is great. And yeah, I think for us, it's just continuing to get the word out about the film, get the word out about these chemicals, because they're still, for a lot of people, they don't know about them. And it's just at the moment, I think, given the kind of difficulty with the regulations, it's really up to individuals to be able to protect themselves. And if you don't know they're there, you can't protect yourself and you can't protect your family. So that's the most important thing for us, is getting the word out and getting the film out and continuing doing screenings like this. And so grateful to you, Serena, for organising this screening and having this opportunity to screen to everybody today.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you to you for your words. I hope there will be many opportunities to fight together in order to share this incredible documentary and awareness about this issue. Thank you so much. If you have the chance to stay with us in order to listen other speakers, you can stay, or if you have to go, I know that it's very late, so I've solved you anyway. Thank you really so much. And I'm going to introduce the second speaker, very special for me. He is an actor. He doesn't need an introduction, but he is Mark Ruffalo. Mark, are you here? Can you hear me?
I'm here, yes.
Hi, Mark.
Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. Hi.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. For taking time for this occasion. Mark Ruffalo is an award-winning actor and activist. He is known not only for his film roles, but also for his outspoken advocacy on climate issues, including PFAS contamination. The first time I saw Mark was at Cinema Troisi. I interviewed him on Poor Things and Sala. Maybe you cannot remember it, but I remember it very well.
Yeah.
And the gesture immediately associated with him is wide open arms toward people, embracing their emotions, their feelings and smiles as a sign of interest and altruism, and above all of humanity. So not only just a great actor, but above all a real human being and an activist. I have to have a spoiler. This is a spoiler. You are also the reason I chose to become a journalist after watching Spotlight. So you carry a tremendous responsibility in my life, but it's just
you too.
no pressure, just to break the ice. Mark, can you tell us about your first meeting with Rob Bilott, when you decided to make the film Dark Waters, and why, and then also about the moment when you and Katrina decided to get involved in this documentary?
Sure. I had read actually from another journalist, Nathaniel Rich, in the New York Times magazine, and it was an article entitled "The Man or the Lawyer Who Was DuPont's Worst Nightmare," and it was about Rob Bilott and his journey to expose DuPont's negligence and malfeasance in releasing and continuing to manufacture this class of chemicals. And I just thought it was remarkable, especially coming from somebody who was at a law firm that would normally be the person that would be defending for these big corporations. That was a particularly interesting point of view, and if anyone knew how to fight them, it was Rob Bilott, and I just found it to be an incredible story, one that we'd never heard, and one that I felt would make a great movie. And then I got to meet Rob, and he's the most humble, sensible, kind individual who really sacrificed his health and, I would say, part of his career at the time for justice. He was approached by a farmer that he knew while he was growing up as a boy, who had hit every wall by every public, the General Counsel for the state. Anyone who was supposed to be in place to fight against this kind of thing had turned their backs on him, and there was Rob Bilott there to help him. And he uncovered that DuPont not only was selling this chemical class, but they also were part of poisoning the whole world. And then I met Katrina, who was also telling the same story years after we made Dark Waters. And I want to do anything I can to help spread the word on this. We're all poisoned by it. None of us asked for it. We're being blamed now because we have used these chemicals and materials in our lives to make our lives more easy, more with less work, and we need to fight against it. And I'm hoping Italy will do that, because at the end of the day, all we really have is our health, and a country that is responsible for their people's health. It will save the people a lot of money and the country a lot of money to make sure that their water is clean and their food is clean and their air is clean, so that they don't have to pay for the damage that happens to people's bodies down the line.
Mark, in this documentary, you mentioned astonishing something like, what kind of people do that? Referring to the fact that the 90% of the PFOS was produced after these companies knew it was toxic and present in human and animal blood. What has been your personal experience working with the communities still affected by PFAS? Many people we know have died from cancer and various other diseases and are still dying. So, and you're told a personal experience as not only an artist, but as Mark.
So, when I went to Ohio with Rob and got to meet with the people from Parkersburg who were fighting this, sadly, I never got to meet with Wilbur Tennant, but you just see people that have been devastated by all kinds of diseases that come from this chemical class in communities where the groundwater is saturated with these chemicals, and there's clusters of cancers, clusters of brain tumors, clusters of reproductive cancers and illnesses. And it's terribly sad, because in some sense, our government has turned their back on them. And at the end of the day, all that's really available to them is to sue these companies for the damages that they did, which could be very, very expensive. People were poisoned for no reason of their own. They didn't choose it. It just happened to be where they lived. And so time and time and time again, whether we're talking about North Carolina or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Minnesota, these communities are just rocked by what they're dealing with, and a federal government that doesn't seem to really be responsive to their needs, or a federal government that doesn't want to hold the polluters accountable. And it's by no choice of their own that they're suffering. And so it's hard to go and hear the desperation of these people that just want to have clean water. And they're poor communities, or they're working class communities who can't really afford to move or to have all of their lives turned upside down to try and get rid of these chemicals from their bodies and from their lives. And so it's very frustrating, and it's sad. And so we keep carrying on, and we keep fighting, and we are making progress in places. A lot of the states are starting to actually use some of Rob's work to make regulations and water regulations and food packaging regulations to mitigate the harm of PFAS and PFOA.
Yeah, I know that you co-founded also the social project, which helps frontline communities fight environmental challenges. How are people there coming together to tackle pollution? So what about this organization, this action? How people are fighting together in order to solve this problem?
So all over the United States, all over the world, you have these frontline communities. Usually they're in America, they're mostly people of color or working class poor people. And they are what we call the front lines, which the fossil fuel or the chemical industry will call the sacrifice zones. They're the sacrifice zones for industry. To have the way of life that Americans feel that they're welcome to. And so a lot of what we do is helping those groups organize, either making documentary pieces for them to organize. We give them a lot of money and institutional support, which is what we mostly do. So we identify groups that are either dealing with poisoned water, poisoned air, but a lot of this comes from the fossil fuel industry. The knockoff effect of drilling, of course, is contaminated water and contaminated air. So in the Mississippi, what they call Cancer Alley, we have a big influence there. We're working with groups, mostly Black-led women's groups that are bringing lawsuits forth against the chemical companies and against the refineries there. And that's how we use our organization to lift their voices. So that's been very effective, and we've got a lot of laws in the books. We've gotten a lot of people, and it's these groups. What we believe is these frontline groups are the ones who are creating the solutions that will need to survive the rest of us in the world. They're already dealing with all of the effects of climate change and pollution from the fossil fuel industry and chemical industry, petrochemical industry. And so they are the people who are going to lead us forward in how we deal with a world that's more and more contaminated and less livable.
Yes, I know there will be really many other opportunities to fight together and become marvelous and big community linked and connected globally in this way. So let's fight together. Mark,
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here with us. If you have the chance to listen other speakers as Rob and Gary, please stay, or we perfectly understand if you have to go, but thank you really for your presence and to be here.
Grazie mille.
Grazie a te, thank you.
Ciao.
And now I'm going to introduce the third speakers, the real Rob Bilott. Rob, are you here with us?
I'm here. Afternoon.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for your presence and for your kind support. Rob is a partner in the Cincinnati and other Kentucky offices of the law firm, Tufts and Hollister LLP, where he has practiced in the environmental and litigation practice groups for over 34 years. Rob is also the author of the book Exposure, Poisoned Water, Corporate Greed, and One Lawyer's 20-Year Battle Against DuPont. And his story is the inspiration for the 29 motion picture Dark Waters, starring Mark Ruffalo as Rob. And Rob's story and work is also featured in the documentaries The Devil We Know and Burned, Protecting the Protectors, very interesting too, and How to Poison a Planet. So, first of all, Rob, you used to work for a law firm that represented major chemical corporations, but then one day you received a phone call from West Virginia and everything changed. That's how Dark Waters begins, but it's also the start of this remarkable real story. For those who aren't familiar with it, could you tell us a bit more about what happened?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you to Serena, everyone involved in making sure we had this event today. This is incredible. Thank you, Gary, for being there in person, and Mark for calling in, and Katrina. This is incredibly important to help bring this story and this information out to folks in Italy and what's going on, frankly, across the world. This whole story sort of started almost 27 years ago when I got a phone call one day in my office at my law firm, which I'm still at, by the way, 35 years, still at the same law firm. But there was a farmer, Mr. Tennant, who you heard some folks talk about already this morning, and he was trying to find out what was happening at this property next to him. Was owned by DuPont, a landfill, and there was white foam coming out of that landfill, flowing into the creek, making his cows sick. And he was convinced there was something in that white foam that was killing his cows and making the wildlife in the area sick. And he had reached out to the government officials, really couldn't get any help. And that phone call actually led to what became really the first lawsuit anywhere involving these chemicals. And actually back then we didn't know we were dealing with these chemicals, but the lawsuit led us to get access to a lot of the internal documents from the DuPont company. And we found out we were dealing with one of these PFAS chemicals that DuPont was using to make Teflon. And we learned that that was something that had been created by the 3M company in Minnesota. This led to what has become now almost 3 decades of nonstop litigation against not only DuPont, but the later years against 3M. We ended up bringing the first case against 3M back in 2005, up in their hometown in Minnesota, in the community of Amara Stranda, you're going to see in the film, in Oakdale. And getting access to all of these documents over all of these years allowed us to finally start bringing this story out. This was information, frankly, about chemicals that have been used since the 40s, but the companies making these chemicals knew about how dangerous and toxic they were, but unfortunately had shielded that from everyone else. But since we were able to start getting access to these documents, we were able to start getting that information out, not only to scientists, but to regulators, and most importantly, also to the public. And what we're now seeing is as that story has made its way out across the world, people are realizing this stuff wasn't just in the water some cows in West Virginia were drinking. These chemicals are now contaminating drinking water all over the planet, including throughout Italy, and hundreds of thousands of people in the Veneto region, for example. It's in people's air, it's in the soil, it's in wildlife, and most importantly, in the blood of virtually every person now on this planet, and children being born pre-polluted. So this has all led to incredible folks like Mark and Katrina being able to put this story out in films to help educate and raise awareness that this is happening on a global scale, and that we're all confronting the same issue. And it's something that hopefully we can all learn from what happened in the US and what we went through for the last several decades, and take steps now to begin protecting people globally. We know the science is there. We know people shouldn't be drinking this. In the US, we've set standards that are essentially, if it's in the water, it's too high. There's no reason people in Italy shouldn't be entitled to those same protections and those same standards. So I'm hopeful that helping bring this story out through these films and all of the activities like what we're doing here today will help make sure that we have global protections for these chemicals.
Thank you, Rob. I just want to try to focus on a specific aspect of this issue. The surprising thing is that as early as 1975, when the first test detected traces of PFOS in human blood, both 3M, the original source and producer, DuPont denied its presence in people's blood. Not only that, they failed to report these findings to the EPA and even published in a scientific paper claiming that PFOS wasn't synthetic, but a naturally occurring substance. Could you tell us more about this aspect? I think this is a key point, the first key point of the story.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see in the film here coming up, and what we've uncovered through all these documents, and Gary was going to lay out a trial for the world to see here, was how much information these companies who made these chemicals knew about how bad this stuff was, how far back that information went, including, that the fact that not only were these chemicals incredibly toxic, cancer-causing, persistent, bioaccumulative, but that they were getting into our blood. This was known back in the 70s. And this is part of, unfortunately, what we discovered was a massive campaign to cover up, conceal the true science and the true risk and danger of these chemicals that went on for decades and to some degree is continuing to this day. Incredible efforts were undertaken by these companies to mislead the scientific community, regulators, our lawmakers, and the public about what these chemicals really can do to people, what the real risks and dangers of them were. And it took decades to get the truth out there. A lot of it was through films like Dark Waters, this current documentary you're going to see the kind of information that these companies had and knowingly withheld and kept from all of us. And because of that, you ended up with essentially contamination of the entire planet. Things that probably could have been stopped or at least minimized decades ago that these companies allowed to continue for this long. And it was only through getting access to these internal documents and litigating this and taking these cases to trials, that this information was finally made available to the rest of the world. And so I think it's incredibly important that folks understand, particularly when we see what's going on now with efforts going on globally to try to finally begin regulating these chemicals and start restricting their use in products. We still see this same campaign going on by the manufacturers to tell folks, oh, we don't know enough about the science. The science isn't clear yet. Oh, we need to take more time to study this. That's why seeing these films and knowing the history of what we really do know and what the science really does say is incredibly important because, again, we know enough to be taking steps now to get this stuff out of people's water now and to be making sure that we don't keep pumping this into the world and that the people who did this should be the ones held responsible, not the victims, not the people in these communities who are drinking it or the taxpayers or the governmental entities. We know who created the problem, and it's time to make sure that they're held responsible for it.
Thank you, Rob. The last question for you. I know that in some way you are also supported the Miteni case in Italy. What would you like to say to the people that were still struggling and looking for a way forward? We know that in north of Italy, especially, people are so tired of suffering, of feeling pain. So if you want to say something to these people.
Sure. It's I'm really just so pleased to see what's happening now in Italy and to see this presentation, for example, going on here in Rome, because I think it was almost 10 years ago that folks in the communities there in the Veneto region outside Vicenza, that had reached out to me saying, hey, we have just found out this chemical PFOA is in our drinking water. Hundreds of thousands of people may be getting exposed from the Martini plant in Italy. Can you help us understand what is this stuff? What's known about it? Because we're not getting much information. So I remember coming out there, I think the first time was in 2017, and meeting with the community members. There were incredible groups like the Mothers Against PFAS, and Greenpeace, and other community organizations that were really trying to make sure that people had access to information and understood what we do know about these chemicals. Incredible efforts were created by the local community there, again, through the Mothers Against PFAS and others, to really make sure that people understood what these chemicals were and what happened. I think I was asked to come out and actually testify at a trial against the corporate representatives of Martini a couple of years ago to help the court understand what information had actually been shared with those companies, from folks like DuPont and 3M. And it was incredible to see the Italian courts actually hold those corporate representatives responsible. That's something that's never happened yet in the United States, where individual corporate executives have actually been held responsible. We haven't seen that happen, but to see that happen in Italy, after all this effort, by the community and the governmental entities to make sure people are actually held responsible here, that was incredible. And I think that's sending a strong message worldwide that this is a problem. The folks that did this ought to be held responsible. And I think it should be incredibly empowering to the folks there in Italy, particularly outside in the Veneto region, outside the Martini plant, to know that standing up, speaking out does make a difference. It does lead to incredible change in things that seem like they're insurmountable. How do you go against these big companies and how do you attack this? It can be done. And I think the folks there in Italy have really, been sort of leading the way and showing other communities across the world that coming together, speaking out, standing up, it does make a huge difference. So I'm really, really proud to see what's happening there in Italy.
Thank you. We are proud too. I will ask you so many other questions, but I have to move fast. Thank you, Rob, really for your presence and your kind support for all these days. If you have the chance to stay here in order to listen the special guest, Gary Douglas, we are glad. Absolutely. But if you have to come back to work, we perfectly understand. So thank you so much, really, for your time. And now I'm just going to introduce the last and very precious speaker of the day, Gary Douglas, the attorney Gary Douglas. He came especially from New York City for this event. So thank you so much, Gary. Thank you. Gary Douglas is a nationally renowned trial attorney and member of the Trial Lawyers Hall of Fame, recognized around the country as a trailblazer in the field of products liability and environmental law. So, Gary, let's start from the beginning. Take me back to the start. I know you are also an artist, and that for 30 years of your life, you traveled the world, giving your music a strong social commitment. Sure. Then you became a lawyer. So how did you meet Robert Bilott, and what brought you closer to the communities affected by PFAS?
That's a great question. Can you hear me? Hit talk. Okay. That's a great question. Let me start with the second question about how I met Rob, because that was a life changer. Yeah. The short answer is hard work. By the time I met Rob, I had already established myself in my profession, in the legal profession, as an accomplished trial lawyer. I had taken on the tobacco industry. I had taken on big pharma and other Fortune 50 companies, and their sordid stories of corporate malfeasance and the harm they caused to so many millions of people around the world. And by that time, when I met Rob, he had been toiling all by himself, fighting the fight against giant corporations, and notably DuPont, as he explained, almost the impossible, studying all and learning all of the internal confidential memorandums that documented all the incriminating evidence and learned all that over a very long period of time. And long story short, the case involving the residents in the local community around the Parkersburg, West Virginia plant for DuPont, where they made these chemicals or used these chemicals that they purchased from 3M, was being used and released into the environment and contaminating the surrounding community and getting into the drinking water, the environment, and most importantly, the blood of the people who lived in the immediate vicinity, and created the proverbial cancer cluster. I'm going to skip some details because of shortness of time, but that case came up for trial, and there was several plaintiffs, individuals who had contracted cancer as a result of their exposure, and those cases were going to be sort of test cases to test the strength of the case, the merits of our case, and the merits of the defense. And this was before Judge Edmund Sargas in Columbus, Ohio. And Rob needed to partner with the trial lawyer to actually try the case, present it to a jury in front of a judge in a courtroom, and tell the story for the first time. DuPont dug their heels in and refused to settle, negotiate. And so Rob reached out to a good friend and colleague of mine, Michael Papantonio, a very well-renowned trial attorney himself, who in turn asked me to be part of this potentially landmark trial where we were going to expose and tell the story to the world of how DuPont had hid for years what they had known about this worldwide contamination of a product that they had used. So he asked us to do this, and there is that scene, if you've all seen the movie Dark Waters, a personal pet peeve of mine, where, if you remember at the end, it's a very dramatic scene where the court asks, who is here for the plaintiff? And Mark Ruffalo stood up as playing the role of Rob and said, I am, Your Honor. That was actually me. It's okay, I ended up on the proverbial editing room floor, but I understood the poetic license and importance of that. And Rob stood by my side, sat by my side at counsel table for 3 trials in a row, and was so invaluable. And that's how we developed the bond that we have maintained over the years throughout the course of our fight against what I call the most egregious case of corporate malfeasance in American jurisprudence history and probably the world. And together we forged our way through 3 of those trials. And I think if we hadn't won those trials, it might have just gone away quietly. But we were dedicated and hardworking, and I did my thing. You mentioned I was an artist. When I step into a courtroom, I see it as a blank canvas where I'm going to paint a masterpiece. And without Rob's valuable knowledge and his years of hard work, I really, truly consider him an American hero for having done that by himself for so many years. And together we won those first 3 cases that really sort of put the issue on the map and started to get the world's attention. And that's sort of on this incredible story of how every person on the planet, virtually every person, has been contaminated by what we call forever chemicals. They do not disintegrate, they do not degrade any further than PFOA and PFOS. They are persistent in the environment and in the body. They have what we call half years. How long does it take to metabolize out of your body? Typical aspirin takes a few hours. Your typical pharmaceutical drug takes a few hours. These chemicals take years. And so the length of time that you're exposed to these make them so dangerous. And so that's sort of the story that we began to tell. And when we won those 3 cases together, the spotlight was sort of drawn. And then we took on 3M, and the rest is history. And a lot of that is told in the documentary you're going to see in a few minutes.
Yeah, following what Mark said, what Rob, said, I'd like to shed a light on another aspect of 3M. In addition to denying the presence of the PFOS in human blood, in 1978, after a major company meeting, 3M removed a significant part of the report, a piece of document, where it stated, I'm going to read, if the levels of PFOS, I suppose, are high and widespread, and the half-life is long, we could have a serious problem. Can you tell us more about that moment, about your first reaction of your team, about this discovery? I think it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. So this is one of the more, and you'll hear this and see this part of the story in the documentary we're going to watch. But on November 6th, 1975, to be precise, DuPont had determined that, 3M had determined that their chemical PFOS was in the blood of the general population, and it was quite a startling moment. And I took the deposition of the most senior toxicologist at 3M. We're faced with the documentary evidence, the incriminating evidence that Rob had spent so many years gathering. When confronted, he had no choice but to acknowledge that they knew back in 1975, I was just a high school student at the time, playing football. And they understood at that time that it was in everyone's blood. And what did they do? They sought to cover up. Their attorneys advised them not to disclose the true origin of this chemical that had been found in everyone's blood by a couple of scientists who were doing research and just stumbled on this discovery. And then they began to test on animals. They began to test on rats and on monkeys, and they were having horrible results. Monkeys and other experimental animals who were exposed to it were developing tumors, kidney issues. The monkeys died wretched deaths, and they kept this all hidden. But they were alarmed at the highest levels of the company. The CEO became alarmed when he found out about this, and so they retained a couple of outside experts to take a look at the issue and find out and get their opinion as to the extent and scope of the potential harm to the general public. And I think maybe the CEO's intentions were good at the time, but it ended up that both of these experts, and the one you're mentioning, you'll hear about this in the film, gave them really bad news and told them, if this is true, then and it really is in everyone's blood, it's mimicking all of the signs of a carcinogen, and you have an awful problem on your hands. And he wrote a memo, a draft memo, but incredibly, the final draft deleted those words, that sentence, that very sentence where the company was warned. The very third-party outside objective opinion they sought told them this is really bad stuff and you've got to do something about it. And they just deleted it from the final memo and kept it secret for decades. And the story of how it became, eventually 27 years later, came to the public's attention is also an incredible story that you'll hear about. It was purely by accident. And if it weren't for this accident, accidental discovery in 1998, we may never have known the true facts. But you should, but that is well described and illustrated in this movie that is so well put together by Katrina McGowan, who has been fantastic in telling the story. And the one other thing is, it wasn't I wasn't a musician for 30 years. I was a musician struggling to make it as a musician till I was 30 years old. Okay. Then became a lawyer. But okay. Anyway, I think you'll find this absolutely compelling. And thank you again for inviting me to speak. Thank you.
Last two questions, very short. After 23 years, they finally reported to IPA, the publicly admitting that PFOS was in everyone's blood, not only in workers' blood, but in everyone's blood. And it was until 2022 that 3M said it plans to stop making PFAS by the end of 2025. Meanwhile, at least 11 other countries are still producing these chemicals. What are supposed to believe? Here we go. We are at the end of 2025. It's really the end. Can you tell us more, or what we should expect from this?
Yeah, so you should never believe the companies. They have never changed their position, and their position has always been that, okay, you got us, it's in everybody's blood, but it's at levels that are so low that it's completely harmless. And the science, since the science has developed incredibly since our trials against DuPont back in 2015 and 16. And the EPA now, the United States EPA has now concluded that PFOA and PFOS, two of the chemicals that are part of the broader family of PFAS, are likely human carcinogens. So those have been the focus of most of the study, but there's thousands of other PFAS chemicals that companies still manufacture, and they're in the same mantra that they're at very low levels and they're completely harmless and nobody should worry about it. Meanwhile, people are dying from cancer. So you should never believe them. They have never changed their story once, even in the face of overwhelming science. And because the story is not that well known, which is incredible to me, given that it's affected. Everybody in this room has it coursing through their blood, which is incredible to me that the story is not more well known. And I usually find when I take on these big corporations in cases of malfeasance like this, the regulatory agencies, at least in the United States and to a certain degree around the world, Europe is a lot further ahead. They're usually in bed, the proverbial being in bed with industry. They're really their stated purpose is to protect the public health, but they're really in bed with the corporations, and they're populated with people who work for the corporations or hope to go work one day for a big fat salary for the corporations, and so they look out for the corporations, and that's why the regulatory process is so long. And so partly they're in bed and partly they're naive. They don't know because the companies were so effective in keeping what they knew secret and away from the folks whose job is to protect us. But they should all be completely banned and prohibited from use.
Thank you, Gary. We are coming to the end of this speech, but I just want to ask you, tell us something to keep in mind for everyone watching this documentary for the first time.
Tell everybody you know. And it's hard, I find sometimes it's hard for folks to believe. It's so incredulous to think about the fact that it's so pervasive and ubiquitous in the world. It's found in snow atop Mount Kilimanjaro. It's found in the fish in the deepest depths of the ocean. It's found in polar bear blood. It's found in everyone's blood. It gets transferred when mothers nurse their children. And just tell everybody. It's hard to believe. I get incredulous looks when I tell folks. And it's sort of a process of denial. But please, watch this movie closely. Watch it again if you'd like. It's a compelling story that needs to be told. It's the greatest story of corporate malfeasance never told. That's how I'd sum it up.
Thank you so much, Gary, for your words. I don't know if...
And by the way, I just want to, again, thank Katrina for her incredible work in telling this story so incredibly well.
I agree. I perfectly agree. I don't know if you want to add something else, but we are going to the end. I hope really there will be many other opportunities to share more light on these issues. And now I'm switching in Italian just to greet who are watching from home. Noi ci stiamo avviando alle conclusioni e adesso chiederò di far partire il documentario. Desidero ancora ringraziare tutti coloro che sono intervenuti. So che molti ci stanno seguendo da remoto, quindi li ringrazio e ringrazio anche coloro che insomma sono riusciti a venire qui in presenza. Avverto chi è da remoto che purtroppo non sarà visibile il documentario, ovviamente per problemi di questioni copyright. Chi fosse interessato al documentario può anche attraverso me insomma contattare la regista Katrina McGowan per cercare di creare molte altre occasioni di diffusione, che siano le scuole, che siano le università, le istituzioni. Insomma, fare rete è fondamentale in questo momento per sensibilizzare un problema che davvero ci riguarda tutti da vicino, quindi non è un optional. Io vi ringrazio ancora per la presenza, ringrazio di nuovo Gary, thank you so much. Insomma, chiedo di far partire il film così il docufilm possiamo vederlo. Vi auguro buona visione.